Long enough had passed for this to continue. One more time, Martin watched as his faithful companion slipped out. In the past, he never gave him any concern. He liked the fact that his dog went wherever he pleased. It was thought that he was more like a cat than a dog. During the course of his workday, Martin never bothered to check on where his dog went. All he cared about was getting back home for dinner. A few days later, he received an alarming phone call. On the other end of the phone, he was told that the number on his dog's tag had been called by someone who had found his dog. He was going to tell him to leave him alone, but he said something unexpected instead. Martin planned on telling the man on the phone that his dog could go wherever he wanted. A panicked feeling went through his body when the man told him where his dog ended up. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our upcoming stories. He immediately wondered why his loyal dog would want to travel that far away and how it was even possible. In light of this, Martin decided to investigate it further. In the time it took Martin to get home from work, his dog had traveled nearly 20 miles away from his home. Martin's dog had a history that he was unaware of the more he looked into this strange phenomenon. There was a lot he didn't know about his dog. In order to keep his dog safe, Martin decided to attach a small camera to the collar of his dog. His only hope was to find out the truth in this way. In the end, Martin realized that nothing would ever be the same in his life once he reviewed the footage on the camera. There wasn't much that Martin Teneman needed to be happy in his life. In fact, he regarded himself as lucky to live in such a small town in Oregon. His mind was peacefully calmed by the beautiful woods that surrounded his home. His previous life had been spent mostly alone, never finding much pleasure in socializing with others. More than anything else, he had always focused on his job at the lumberyard. But one day, as he was driving home from work, he discovered a dog. The stray golden retriever's name was still fresh in Martin's mind. It was still warm from his breakfast that morning, so he had it in his car. While Martin was waiting for his new owner to get home from work, he assumed his new canine friend was just walking around the property, looking for something to do to entertain himself. Like clockwork, Waffles would come out of the front door at the same time as Martin did. While Martin climbed into his truck and headed for work, he watched a canine in his rearview mirror making his way into the woodland. Martin was cataloging the newest lumber haul and making sure they were all loaded into the trucks at his work to go to their warehouses. That's when he got a phone call, something that didn't happen very often. He didn't recognize the number and had half a mind to ignore it, but he felt a gut feeling telling him to answer it. They told him that they had found his dog and called the number on his tag. He thought that they would say they were a mile away from his home, but the truth was going to make them question his dog's behavior. Martin was going to tell the man on the phone that his dog could go where he pleased, but when the man told him where his dog had ended up, alarm bells went off in his head. How did his dog end up nearly 20 miles away from his home and then make it back by the time Martin got back from work? Martin headed home after his shift finished and wondered if he was right or not. But once he drove up his long driveway to his home, he saw what he thought he would. Waffles. The dog had managed to make it home before he got there, despite being 20 miles away just a few hours prior. What is he doing so far away? How did he even manage such a feat? But the closer Martin looked into the strange phenomenon, the more he realized that his dog had a history that he wasn't aware of. He decided there was only one way he would really understand what his dog was doing every day. He had a small GoPro lying around. It would be perfect for what he wanted to use it for. Martin decided to set up a small pet camera on his dog's collar. It was concealed well enough and wasn't heavy enough to cause any problems. This was the way he'd find out the truth. Waffles didn't seem to even notice the camera was hanging from his neck. Now he'd just have to be patient and see what he got up to the next day. Martin went to work again the next day, but his mind was lingering on what his dog was doing. He just had to make it home and check the memory card inside the camera. Finally, his shift ended and he made his way home. But when he decided to check the footage on the camera, his face turned to horror as he understood nothing would ever be the same in his life again. Martin found Waffles waiting for him at home when he got back. He fed him his dinner and took the memory card from the camera to his laptop. He navigates to the recording and hit play. He watched his dog walking through the woodlands. He walked alongside it for miles until a familiar place came into view. Martin watched as his dog headed to a gas station. He knew which gas station that was. This was the very road that he had found Waffles a few months ago. Martin expected the clerk to tell the dog to get lost, but he was glad he had sound recording too. He heard, "There you are, Waffles. How's your new owner treating you?" Martin knew that he had to make his way down there if he wanted to find out what was really going on when he was at work. He grabbed his coat and led Waffles into his truck. They were going for a ride. Martin drove 20 miles to the gas station from the GoPro. He knew the place relatively well and even got gas there a number of times over the years. It was the first time he walked through the automatic doors and looked the clerk in the eyes. But it was his dog that had the biggest reaction. The clerk's eyes lit up when he saw the dog by Martin's side. I believe you know my dog?" He decided to admit everything to him on the spot. "Waffles, or Scraps, before you adopted him, has been coming here for years. He just arrived one day begging for food. I decided to give him something, and that was that. Ever since then, he's come to my store for his daily snack. But one day, I noticed something very strange, but I was so glad when I saw it. I affectionately called him Scraps, since that's all he was ever after when he came here. I was so happy because that meant someone had finally taken him off the street. He'd been waiting around here for 4 years before you finally took him in. Afterward, I was still surprised to see him coming here, but I guess he got attached to me too." Martin looked at his pooch, who was wagging his tail in excitement. He must have been expecting a treat since he was in the store. Martin watched as a new interaction unfolded. The clerk smiled and said, "You already got your treat today. I really shouldn't feed him anymore since now he has a warm home, but I just can't help it." When Martin stared at the two, and his heart warmed. "I'll take a stick of jerk, please," he asked the clerk. He seemed to understand what he was doing, and smiled and gave him the stick. Martin paid with cash and gave the jerky to Waffles, who wolfed it down. The clerk and Martin laughed together at the lovable pooch that had unexpectedly come into their lives. Martin felt a lot better now that he understood where his dog was going every day. As a cherry on top, it was good to know that Waffles had friends outside of his relationship with him. As more time passed, a bond between the clerk and Martin developed. He learned that his name was Rodney, and he even invited him back to his house for a beer and to play with Waffles while he wasn't working.